Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a profoundly fascinating text to explore with you today.
We really do.
And it's a bit of a departure from our usual stacks of research papers or sweeping historical overviews. Instead, our mission for this deep dive is to examine a very brief but incredibly dense excerpt from a Substack post.
Yeah, it's short, but it packs a huge punch.
Exactly. The piece is titled Episode 528, Non-Speaking, Field Notes from the Script Gatherers. And it's written by Jaime Hoerricks, Ph.D.
And what we are looking at here is a radical reframing of what it means to be non-speaking.
Right, because this text takes our conventional understanding of silence.
Which society almost always views as a state of emptiness, just a void waiting to be filled.
Yes, and it completely transforms it into a state of active, hidden life.
It's a phenomenal piece of writing because it forces a pause. In our modern culture, and honestly in most of the deep dives we do, the focus is heavily weighted toward measurable output.
Oh, absolutely.
We look for the visible results, the loud declarations, the data points we can track. But Hoerricks is asking us to turn our attention to the invisible.
To the things we can't easily measure.
Right. She is demanding that we reevaluate the spaces we instinctively write off as blank. When we encounter someone who isn't speaking, the societal default is almost universally to assume a lack of internal activity.
Which is such a massive oversight.
It is. We wrongly equate the absence of an audible output with an absence of internal presence. And Hoerricks uses these highly evocative, nature-based images to dismantle that assumption piece by piece. She offers a first-hand look into a vibrant reality that happens entirely beneath the surface.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the central metaphor she introduces right at the beginning is where that dismantling starts.
Yeah.
She presents the idea that being non-speaking is like a biological winter.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to read the exact text so we can really sit with the weight of her words here. She writes, "When quiet was praised, speech was proof, and winter was mistaken for emptiness." I know, I had to put the text down when I first read that line. We are so conditioned to view biological dormancy as a cessation of life.
Rather than a consolidation of energy.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is how effortlessly that metaphor exposes the flaw in the observer rather than the subject. As you said, we look at a bare tree in January and assume the work has stopped.
Right, because there are no leaves.
Exactly. We completely miss the intense root-level conservation happening below the frost line. Hoerricks states unequivocally that silence is not absence.
Silence is not absence.
I would argue that is the absolute cornerstone of her entire philosophy here. She describes her state of non-speaking during childhood as a time of being active, storing, and alive.
Which completely flips the script.
It does. It is the necessary period of existence that happens, in her words, before bloom, before broadcast.
Before broadcast. That's such an interesting word choice.
It is, because biologically speaking, winter is an incredibly vulnerable but intensely productive time for an organism. The energy hasn't vanished. It has just retreated inward for protection and preparation.
Let me push on that a bit, though. Because from the outside, a tree in winter really does look dead.
It does.
If we apply that to human interaction, how does she convey to the reader that she was actually active? It's almost like, it's like walking past a massive server farm.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. From the outside, it's just a silent, boring, windowless brick building. You would never know it's processing billions of pieces of data a second unless someone gave you the schematics.
That is a perfect analogy. And she provides the schematics by defining exactly what was happening inside that windowless building. She wasn't just sitting there. It was an active period of storing. The resources were being gathered, cataloged, and protected for the eventual spring.
For the bloom.
Exactly. And I think it's vital we linger on that word proof. She wrote, "Speech was proof."
Yeah, that hit hard.
We have set up a terrifying standard in our culture. If speech is the only accepted proof of intellect, of engagement, or even of humanity, then silence is presumed to be an intellectual death.
When it's actually just winter.
Right. She is telling us that the proof was always there, it just wasn't legible to the people demanding it.
I'd love for you listening right now to reflect on that standard in your own life. How often do you equate silence with a lack of thought?
It happens all the time.
Think about the dynamic in a crowded room. If someone isn't talking, what is the immediate assumption?
That they aren't engaged.
That they have nothing to contribute to the group. If a child isn't speaking, the assumption is often that the child isn't processing the world around them. We treat audible speech as the absolute baseline for presence. But Hoerricks forces us to ask, what if that silence is actually a period of intense, hyper-focused gathering.
Which brings us directly to the title of her piece and the internal experience she outlines. She calls it field notes from the script gatherers.
Yes.
She also refers to the weather beneath the label non-speaking.
The weather beneath the label.
These aren't just poetic flourishes. They are precise descriptions of a cognitive state. Let's pause on that word scripts for a moment.
Let's do it.
In neurodivergent communities, scripting often refers to the repetition of phrases, echolalia, mimicking what has been heard.
Right.
But Hoerricks reframes this beautifully. She's not describing a process of mindless mimicking. She's describing a process of archiving.
Archiving.
Yeah.
Right. She's building a library of human interaction from the ground up.
Exactly.
She specifically talks about gathering language underground during the years before language became audible. And that implies a deeply sensory experience.
Yes, it's physical.
Gathering is physical labor. You don't just passively receive things when you gather. You seek them out, you harvest them, you pull them down into the soil to store them.
Exactly. By calling herself a script gatherer, she completely redefines the role of a non-speaking individual.
How so?
Well, a gatherer is a highly active participant in their ecosystem. And look at the term field notes. What does it mean to take field notes?
It implies observation, right?
Observation without interference. You sit in the blind, you watch the wildlife, you meticulously record their behaviors, their calls, their movements.
You don't jump out and interrupt them?
You don't. That was her reality. She was in the blind, studying the adults around her, banking their language for a future season.
I'm curious how you interpret the emotional toll of that, though. Because while it sounds incredibly industrious, there was a stark contrast between what everyone else was seeing and what she was actually experiencing.
Oh, a massive contrast.
From the outside, there was stillness. But from the inside, as she writes, it felt like winter, everything alive, just underground.
The toll must have been immense, primarily because of the isolation of that experience.
Right.
Historically, and unfortunately even today in some circles, the medical and educational models view non-speaking individuals as broken systems that need to be repaired.
Or empty vessels that need to be filled by an expert.
Exactly. Hoerricks flips that narrative entirely. The non-speaking child in her text is not an empty vessel.
The child is the expert.
The child is the scientist taking the field notes. The tragedy is that she was doing all this brilliant construction in the dark, and because the people outside couldn't see the lights on, they assumed the building was abandoned.
But this furious underground gathering didn't happen in a vacuum, did it? Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because Hoerricks grounds this deeply philosophical metaphor in a very specific, unforgiving historical context. She takes us back to the early 70s, specifically citing 1970 and 1971.
And that era completely changes how we view the reactions of the adults around her.
It really is.
It is a crucial distinction. We have to contrast the era she is describing with the modern infrastructure we have today.
Right.
In our current landscape, if a child is non-speaking, there is an entire vocabulary of neurodiversity that immediately surrounds them. There are therapies, specialized educators, and advocacy groups.
None of which existed back then.
In 1970, that simply did not exist. Notice the specific details she uses to paint that absence. She writes, there was no clinical...
That imagery is so striking. A clinical phrase hovering in the air.
It is.
It almost suggests that today, a diagnosis acts like a permanent weather system following a child around. It can be helpful, but it also casts a shadow.
Precisely. And she goes further, noting there was no laminated chart. No multidisciplinary meeting.
Just a total absence of the modern framework.
We need to think about what those objects represent. A laminated chart is sterile. It's permanent. It's an object of clinical authority where a child's development is tracked, wiped clean, and tracked again. A multidisciplinary meeting is a formalized apparatus of adults sitting around a table dissecting a child's behavior. The complete absence of that modern clinical apparatus meant that the adults of the 1970s had to default to something else to categorize her.
And that default was what she calls a different vocabulary.
Yes.
She describes it as quieter, older, more domestic. And this brings us to a really haunting section of the text titled, Opening Sky the Forecast Issued by Adults.
It's so powerful.
I want to pause on the juxtaposition of those words, sky and forecast.
It's a brilliant setup regarding power dynamics. A sky is vast, infinite, and inherently uncontrollable.
It contains all the weather.
It contains complex, volatile weather systems. That sky represents her internal mind. A forecast, on the other hand, is an external prediction.
It's an attempt to control the sky.
Exactly. It's an attempt by an authority figure to put that vast sky into a neat, predictable little box based solely on surface-level observations. The adults were issuing a forecast to make themselves comfortable, completely ignoring the massive internal climate she was experiencing.
Which makes the actual words of their forecast so heart-wrenching when you read them through the lens of her underground winter.
It really does.
What was this quieter, older, domestic vocabulary?
Yeah.
Here are the specific labels the adults placed on her. She's such a good child.
Yeah.
So well-behaved. Quiet, not fussy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound tragedy of those domestic labels becomes inescapable.
Let's look at not fussy.
Let's really analyze it. The adults in her life were looking at this intensely active internal winter, this exhausting, furious gathering of scripts and language, and they interpreted it merely as convenience for themselves.
Wow.
A not fussy child is simply a child that does not demand adult intervention. They praised her quietness because it made her easy to manage in a 1970s household.
They called it good behavior.
Yep.
They entirely missed the rich, active life happening right in front of them simply because it wasn't causing a disruption. It wasn't making noise.
They praised the quiet, but as we discussed earlier, they still believed speech was proof.
Right.
So what does that mean for how they viewed her? It means they viewed her as a convenient object.
Because she wasn't speaking.
Because she wasn't speaking, she wasn't seen as fully participating in the human experience. She was just a good, quiet piece of the domestic background.
That is devastating.
The domestic vocabulary of 1970 didn't just fail to describe her internal reality, it actively erased it by replacing it with a label of absolute convenience.
They were thankful for the peace and quiet, blissfully unaware of the frantic, brilliant construction happening just beneath the floorboards.
Exactly.
It makes me think about how human beings measure value. We demand that internal life be converted into external broadcasts, to use her word, in order to be recognized as valid.
If you don't project it,
If you don't say it out loud, society assumes it didn't happen.
it is a profound survival story. She was surviving an absolute lack of recognition from her outside environment.
Yeah.
She was meticulously observing adults who thought she was essentially empty. The fact that the adults in the early 70s didn't have the tools or perhaps the inclination to see the work she was doing doesn't mean the work wasn't happening.
The script was being written.
The script was being written, the language was being gathered, the signal was just traveling through a medium they weren't tuned into.
So what does this all mean? How do we take these two totally different realities and synthesize them?
It's the big question.
On one side, we have the adult's forecast issuing these convenient domestic labels, seeing a well-behaved silent child. On the other side, we have the child's actual reality, a vibrant, script-gathering existence, experiencing the intense weather of a necessary winter.
To summarize this divide, we have to recognize that the adults were interacting with a mirage of their own making.
A mirage.
They praised a quietness that wasn't actually quiet, it was just hidden. They mistook a vital storing phase for a state of emptiness.
Right.
The ultimate takeaway from Hoerricks' text is that their metric for proof of life was fundamentally flawed. It reveals a vast, almost unimaginably large disconnect between external observation and internal experience, especially regarding human communication.
And this is where we turn it directly over to you, listening right now. What stands out to you about this massive contrast?
Think about the words.
When you hear the words good, quiet, and not fussy placed right next to gathering language underground and everything alive, how does that change the way you perceive the people around you?
It shifts everything.
It is so incredibly easy to fall into the trap of that domestic vocabulary. It is so much easier to look at a silent person and say, oh, they are just quiet, than it is to stop and consider the complex, invisible weather they might be navigating.
We are all deeply conditioned to require a broadcast.
We really are. If someone isn't broadcasting, we tune out. We assume the station is off the air.
But Hoerricks is telling us from her own firsthand field notes that the station is very much on the air.
It never stopped broadcasting internally.
Right. And as we synthesize the journey of this deep dive, I think the true power of this text lies in its ability to serve as a historical document of an internal world that survived undetected.
It's profound.
It demands that we fundamentally change our perception of human existence. Being non-speaking is not a void. It is not an absence. It is a necessary, highly active season of preparing.
Exactly. It's not something broken that needs to be fixed so that it can finally start working. It is already working.
The gathering is the work.
The gathering is the work. We have to learn to look past those superficial praises of quietness. We have to recognize when we're using domestic vocabularies that are designed purely for our own convenience rather than the reality of the person in front of us.
Mm.
When we only place value on the bloom and the broadcast, we completely devalue the essential work of the winter.
We miss the life happening just underground.
So how does this impact your daily life moving forward?
I think the immediate application here is a profound call to action regarding how we encounter silence in our day-to-day routines.
Absolutely.
Whether it is later today or tomorrow, you are going to encounter silence. You might encounter it in a meeting, in a classroom, in your own home, or even within yourself.
Yes.
When you do, we urge you to remember these field notes. Do not automatically mistake that silence for emptiness. Do not demand immediate proof of life through speech. Give the silence the respect of a winter season,
Recognize that there might be a script gatherer at work.
actively gathering language underground. And that raises an important question, which is the thought I want to leave you with today. It is something to really mull over as you navigate the rest of your week.
I love this.
If we truly accept Dr. Hoerricks' metaphor, if we accept that a lack of audible language is just a winter of gathering scripts underground, how might our entire society change if we stopped demanding immediate broadcasts from everyone and instead learn to value the hidden, vital work of the quiet seasons?
A truly beautiful and provocative note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of the script gatherers. We hope this exploration has challenged your assumptions and changed the way you view the quiet moments and the quiet people in your life. Until next time, keep looking beneath the surface. Take care, everyone.